Hi everybody, it's Bishop Michael here in the Schultz Chapel at the Eastern Synod office. Last Christmas season, my colleagues and I here at the office, we shared a children's book with you, and it seems that has now become an annual tradition. And this year we're going to share with you a book called Song of the Stars, A Christmas Story by Sally Lloyd-Jones with paintings by Allison J. I hope you enjoy it. The world was about to change forever, and it almost went by unnoticed. But the leaves that night rustled with a rumor. News rang out across the open fields. A song drifted over the hills.
The wind whispered it softly in the sycamore trees that waved their moonlit branches to the sky. Barn owl took flight. Woodland creatures stirred. It's time. It's time.
In the pine wood, 2 deer raised their heads. A brown bear sniffed the air, a red fox darted. The faces of little flowers lifted to the skies. It's time. It's time.
The skies shouted it to the seas, that thundered it to the waves, that roared it to the great white whales, that sang it to the starfish in the deep. And tiny sandpipers danced it on shining sands. It's time, it's time.
The running rivers bounded over boulders, and the otters clapped and played and sang to the ducklings that splashed and quacked to the salmon that leapt and leapt. And tiny field mice and insects and little creeping things and sparrows and robins and every single blade of grass squeaked and hummed and chirped and sang, "It's time, it's time."
Wild stallions drummed it to the ground. Get ready! Get ready! Be glad! Be glad! On a lonely peak, a lion raised his strong head and roared it out to the empty wilderness. The mighty king, the Prince of Peace.
All the stars joined together in a chorus that rang out through the heavens, the bright and morning star. And on a hillside overlooking a little town, sheep nuzzled their new lambs. The Good Shepherd.
Suddenly, angels lit up the whole sky, and a great choir sang it out loud. It's time, he's come, at last, he's here.
And in a little town, in a little shed, in a little window, a candle flickered in the dark.
And a tiny cry rang out in the cold night air. And high above, a single star set in the highest heavens shone out brighter than all the others and poured down silver onto the little shed. A light to light up the whole world.
The animals stood around his bed, and the whole earth and all the stars and sky held its breath. The one who has made us has come to live with us.
And a young mother, with no place to rest and nowhere to stay, kept it as a song inside her heart, our rescuer.
And they gazed in wonder at God's great gift, lying on a bed of straw, wrapped in rags, a tiny little baby, heaven's son, sleeping under the stars that he made. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. As a child, I was always mystified by this line from the carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem. I certainly understood something of the hope of Christmas. I had grand hopes for what would happen the next morning. But what role could fear possibly play in the wondrous and beautiful story of the first Christmas? But in time I learned something about the fear of a young mother about to bear her first child under far from ideal circumstances, alone in a cattle shed. I learned about the fear of a poor father, unable to provide his family with proper shelter. The fear of simple shepherds, startled by the unexpected appearance of heavenly emissaries. The fear of a jealous and vengeful king, whose terrors would soon force the young family to flee to a distant land as refugees. Hope and fear did indeed meet on that first Christmas night, and they've been meeting there ever since. For most of us, that will again be the case this year. But fear cannot get the final word for this Christmas any more than it did for the first. Despite our quite understandable anxieties and fears, it's not a message of fear, but rather one of hope, that we will again proclaim and celebrate this Christmas, and perhaps with a deeper integrity than might be the case under less challenging circumstances. At Christmas, we celebrate a God who loves creation so intensely that he chose to enter into the very heart of our creaturely existence, for good and for ill, not just for one day of the year, but for all 365. Fear not, dear friends. The light of Christ's presence still shines bright. It is the light of divine hope, a light that casts out fear and scatters the darkness. Fear not. Christ the Savior